welcome everybody. I've really enjoyed the speakers so far. I hope you all have as well. I'm seeing some people just starting their journey with modelling and PLEXOS, and others deep into it, and you know, producing richer and richer insights that are informing better decisions to stakeholders and to society. And at the end of the day, we don't do this for academic fun because we like fiddling with computers. We do it because we want to improve the human condition. You know, we want to make the world a better place, and better models lead to better decision making and ultimately a better society. So I never lack motivation when someone sends me a hard problem, and I'm always motivated to improve the performance of the software, because if we can deliver richer insights in less time, then there's a real benefit to that. So in that vein, I'm going to talk today about some recent improvements that are available in PLEXOS 8, a feature called mixed resolution modelling, and how that sort of allows you to sort of unlock the potential of PLEXOS. So our goal as always is to make PLEXOS powerful and flexible, and like no simulation is ever complete, right? You want more detail, you want greater co-optimization, you want to run more scenarios and get a richer distribution or feel for the confidence you have in your results. So nothing is ever enough. And what we're finding, just as a general rule, a little bit like Moore's law, is that the models that are coming back to us for analysis are sort of doubling in size every 2 years. And it's not uncommon now, which would have been inconceivable to me 20 years ago, that people are solving cases where the matrix size is as big as 50 million or more coefficients, and integer models with 100,000 or more integers that actually solve. So we need to be running all the time and constantly innovating in the development team to keep up with those demands. So when we look at the solve time for a model, an LP, so kind of the traditional idea was that the bigger the LP is, the runtime will increase kind of on a polynomial basis. But some advancements in parallelizing parts of the LP solution, and even simplex has been parallelized to a certain extent now, mean that in fact the solve time for LP is pretty much linear with the number of non-zeros up to a certain point, and then it kind of reverts to a polynomial shape after that. So that's a really interesting result, in that it sort of suggests that there's a sweet spot around here where we kind of want to avoid going up the curve, right? So we really we want more control over the matrix size so that we can stay, looking more like the rabbit here and less like the tortoise. So similarly with MIP, I guess when MIP started to be used routinely in simulations, the solve times were almost random. They were very problem specific, and it was actually difficult to justify using MIP for commercial simulation, say 15 years ago. But now MIP algorithms have improved to the point that their solve times are almost predictable, although it's still hard to sort of find any kind of correlations in here. But depending on your application, many applications, including a lot of unit commitment problems, the solve times are quite predictable now. But as I sort of say here, it's very dependent on the number of intertemporal links in the model, so whether you're running a weekly step or a daily step, and the number of co-optimized products seems to, basically how big the combinatorial problem is, right, and how badly those integer decisions are linked together. So what I tried to do here was run a whole bunch of cases and see if there was a nice curve here, but you can't because it's so problem specific. But within any particular problem, then there is certainly a sweet spot. And interestingly, among the three sort of big solvers, there's a sort of convergence on solve time now. There's really no winner between those three at the moment. But sometimes one will make an advance and the others take a while to catch up. There's some other solvers emerging called hybrid solvers that use combinations of heuristics and combinatorial solution methods to try and tackle MIP problems. And there's a few of those around, and I love playing around with them, but they're still sort of as much as 3 orders of magnitude slower than just straight MIP. So we'll keep an eye on them, but they're not really quite viable yet. So in summary, when we look at LP and MIP, there's a clear sweet spot. Problem size this way and solution time, and there's sort of a range depending on where your problem is, where this relationship is roughly linear before it gets into the ether there. And you kind of want to avoid tipping into this area. And especially for MIP, it can be absolutely terrible if your problem is just a little bit too hard, right? You can go from a solve time of a few minutes to hours. So what this has motivated me to look at is how do we give you finer control over the size of the problem, especially say LT plan models or short-term unit commitment problems, so that you can stay in that sweet spot, right? Now, I'm not going to read anything from this. This is just a reference of what's there now, prior to this new feature. So you could, for example, you could fiddle around with the periods per day. You could say, well, rather than if I'm doing an LT plan, maybe I don't run hourly, but I run 3 hourly, or but the problem with that is that affects all periods, and when you're looking at intermittent generation and storage, as you start to group all of the periods together, you're losing a lot of detail. So that's a pretty rough kind of control. And similarly, ST schedule gives you a look ahead, which you can vary the resolution of the look ahead. So the look ahead can be a different resolution to the main step. That's a good positive move. But again, that's applying across the whole horizon. So if you're doing a 30-year model and you're running ST schedule, then whatever settings you've got for the first year are going to be the same settings in year 30. And so it's not very flexible. Both LT plan and MT schedule allow you to have quite fine control over slicing of when you're using the load duration curve. So you've got the LDC type, so whether the load duration curves are daily, weekly, monthly, and how many blocks, and that's all great. And there's even a feature called, which you've probably never heard of, called the last block count, which allows the number of blocks in the load duration curves to either increase or generally decrease over time to reduce the total number of simulated periods. So for say just the partial chronology, we seem to have good control, but as we've seen from some of the presentations today, and it's increasingly obvious that partial chronology kind of doesn't cut the mustard when it comes to storage modelling. So at the moment we've got, you can choose sampled chronology, which means it'll take, say, sampled days or weeks and just run those and then extrapolate the results. Or you can use fitted chronology, which uses a curve fitting algorithm to the load, and you can define how many periods to fit over whatever period, days, weeks, and so on. But up till this point, neither of those methods had any way of varying the amount of detail across the horizon. Now, just jumping back to the LDC part, and just demonstrating how effective that last LDC block count is. I tested a pan-European model, which is pretty large, 41 regions, 3,500 generators over 36 years. And in PLEXOS 7.5, the client could only run 6 by 6 years, so the 36 years were done in 6 steps of 6 years each at 12 blocks per month. PLEXOS 8, for all its speed improvements and memory improvements, was able to run 18-year steps, and I used the last block count to reduce that, and we were actually able to solve the full 36 years in one step on a high memory cloud machine. So there is some flexibility available already in PLEXOS with the partial chronology, so I'm just making you aware of that feature, that's there. And ideally with LT, you kind of want to be looking at longer steps than is possible for investment decisions. However, let's think about intermittent generation. This is a neat little test case that our US office came up with, which kind of demonstrates why you might want to use a full chronology when looking at storage. So imagine a case where you've got a choice between two battery types. One is optimized for capacity, 40 megawatt hours versus power of 5 megawatts, and one is optimized for power, 10 megawatts power and 20 megawatts capacity with different build costs. So it's pretty easy to construct a case, as they did, that shows that depending on the load shape, you can see that the blue load shape would favour the battery that can produce power, right? And the greyer load shape there would favour the battery that is able to provide less power for a longer period of time. So it favours capacity. So using that load shape, they then tested the load duration curve approach versus the fitted chronology. And the interesting outcome is that the LDC approach, or the partial chronology, always chose battery B. It always went for the power, all right? It didn't care about the capacity because it didn't know, all it knows is that this energy occurs in the day, right? It didn't know that it was a stretch of energy where it needed to provide that out of storage. So, whereas the fitted chronology correctly chose between the two batteries depending on whether power or capacity was required. And so it's a fairly stark demonstration that the load duration curve approach is really no good for valuing storage. So I think we need to be moving forward with fitted chronology. And the interesting thing in this example here is you could dull down the resolution of the fitted to almost nothing, and it would still pick the correct option. So the challenge is, how do we make this fitted chronology run faster? Firstly, inside the PLEXOS engine, the MT fitted chronology, sorry, I'll just put this away. The MT fitted chronology actually just shares the same source code as ST schedule, so it has potentially everything in there: startups, ramping rates, all of that stuff, right? It's basically on by default. So you might want to look at for long-term modelling, turning some of that off, right? Because the motivation to go to fitted chronology is to get the valuation of storage and intermittent generation right. You're not really worried about how many starts a generator does in 2036 generally, or you can use ST for that later, right? So have a look at the options. There's some help on the so-called hidden parameters where you can turn off some of the stuff in LT when you go to a full chronology to pull back the size of the model. You might want to use just linear commitment instead of integer. And also this option here, if you've got a big model, right, that's sort of at the limit of what the solver can deal with, you don't want to be iterating it multiple times just to converge a few transmission limits. So look at the option to formulate all constraints up front, which is in the transmission settings. Ideally, you want to get to one shot that's as light as possible, but still, does the job. So yeah, just a few tips there. You might need to use hidden parameters to turn all this on. In future PLEXOS versions, we're going to try and streamline the setting of these options by simulation phase. Okay, so mixed resolution, what is it? Well, the idea is to apply the fitted chronology to LT plan and MT schedule, and on the motivation that is the best approach for modelling power grids with storage, especially small-scale storage. But that currently, because you can only set the resolution once, so all the years have the same resolution. We actually want more flexibility. So correctly value storage, solve the entire horizon at one step if possible, or at least larger chunks of the horizon at a time, and try keep the problem size in the sweet spot. So it's all about tuning for that sweet spot of the solver. And the approach is that we're going to vary the resolution. And it might be, this is just an example, that you use high resolution in the first years and less resolution further out, or you may prefer to do it the other way around, it doesn't matter. Just you can focus the resolution of the simulation on the years that are critical, and the less important times you can dull down the resolution. So here's an example where I took, and I'll caveat this by saying it's a very early test model from AEMO's ISP, so this is not their full-scale thing, but the AEMO ISP study, some of the test models I got were 20 years and some of them were 25, so in that range. But they want to model as much detail as possible, and they've sort of landed on eight blocks a day in the fitted chronology as what they're aiming for as their ideal approach. So I had a go at solving this for 25 years at 8 blocks per day, and the LP was 176 million non-zeros. And I left it running on a machine on the cloud for a megasecond, 11 and a half days. It nearly finished, but it was just so little indication as to whether it was really going to finish or not. I decided to kill it at that point. And the machine was costing me $5 an hour because it was the fastest one they had. So the IT guy was looking at me every morning going, "Have you turned that thing off yet?" And I'm like, "It's nearly done." But anyway, look, so I had to give up. I was too far up the polynomial there with the problem size. So now AEMO's approach is to solve either in 5 or 7 year steps. And they, maybe 8 year steps, I think, so you've tried. So you're trying to stretch that step size out, but they have to break it up. So, but anyway, what I wanted to do was demonstrate the mixed resolution on this. So keep the resolution as high as possible, but bias the resolution, this is just my approach, to early years. And my justification for putting the resolution in the early years is just the effect of discounting, right? So the outer years don't matter so much anyway to the objective function, but there's no reason why you couldn't bias the resolution towards the end of the year, as I think they've suggested they might do, because that's when some of the small scale storage is actually expected to come in. So, and I'll try to solve this in a single optimization using mixed resolution. And I'm sorry you can't read this. It's probably a good thing anyway. But the mixed resolution is currently implemented through an external PLEXOS parameter file, and some of you may have used these before. They're kind of a way of us putting features into the software before they've been put into the GUI. We'll work out a way to put this in nicely, hopefully soon. But at the moment, it's just implemented this way. So there's some XML here, but all it's doing is just saying that we'll use 8 blocks per day for years 1 to 5, we'll use 6 blocks per day for years 6 to 10, and use 18 blocks per week for years 11 to 25. So internally, PLEXOS actually fits all of those to the whole horizon at once, and then it just takes that piece and that piece and that piece. So it allows you to mix weekly and daily fitting options seamlessly, because it doesn't have to be at certain week or day boundaries. It just fits it and then takes the pieces and puts them together. So what does it look like? So this is the 8 blocks per day. I picked a month, July 2019, 8 blocks per day. So you can see it looks almost like a full resolution demand curve. And you've got, the algorithm preserves the peak and off-peak, but it combines like periods together to save computation. Then if you go out towards the end, using my example where we were down to a number of blocks per week, this is the kind of fitting you get way out in the outer years. So you're still getting peak off peak, but a lot of periods are being combined together now. But the key point is this is way better than a low duration curve approach, right? So again, using just a draft model from AEMO, which happened to be a 20-year case, if we solve with 5-year steps, the LP size is about 27 million non-zeros. It takes 5 hours and 8 minutes to solve and uses 18 gigabytes. So I sort of set my mixed resolution up to be roughly the same solve time, but 1 by 60 million non-zeros, 6 hours solve time and a bit more memory, but in this version, I'm solving the whole horizon in 1 step, right? And in this one, this is 5 steps. So 1 20-year horizon, roughly the same runtime, and is not surprising, a little bit more memory use. This is a sort of comparison of the new builds. I kind of aggregated them into groups, and so you can compare. Here we've got energy storage expansion, which was identical between the two solutions. And that's probably not surprising because the storage, the small-scale storage expansion is happening later in the model, and the 5-year step that AEM are using is perfectly adequate to pick up, to value that sort of decision because of the small scale of the storage, I think. And then there were just small differences in the generation expansion. Essentially, they're extremely similar results. So some conclusions from that, and I think I need to do some more work on this, as in I need to run ST now and just confirm what the real differences are between the two solutions, but the results are practically identical. Yeah, we definitely want to go for the fitted, and but just an interesting point about the fitted versus the partial is there's almost reverse logic here in that when you're fitting steps to a curve, you want to give PLEXOS as much flexibility to combine periods as possible. So in fact, choosing weekly and a high number of blocks is better than daily with a small number of blocks, even if it's the same number per week in the end. Because if you choose to cut each day off, you're artificially forcing PLEXOS to break those two periods, which might be in the middle of the night when they should just be combined together. So I'll sort of make the point there that 14 blocks a week is actually better than 2 per day, even though they're the same number per week. So there's more work here. This is kind of a new, obviously a new thing, and I'd love to come up with some better guidelines as to what resolution to use for what type of investments, and I think this will emerge over time as we understand this more. So that's LT, and of course, to validate these results, you often run ST. And we had a case recently where someone was running ST schedule for 36 years, 1 day at a time. And the problem is that ST, by default, just runs 1 day at a time sequentially. And it was taking 30 hours to solve that for a pan-European model. So I don't know if you're familiar with this, but there's the ability in ST to split the run by year. And the split run on this case, running on a high memory cloud machine, took 1.5 hours. So it's basically breaking the years up. Having solved LT, all of the expansion decisions are known, and then it comes down to ST and can run the years independently. So, I guess the point here is, you don't have to put up with ridiculously long ST run times. Look at parallelizing it. Look at splitting it by using our split run option, and certainly ask for some help on this, because we can always speed things up through parallel runs. So a second application, which might not have seemed obvious from the first one. Like the first one was LT Plan, and that's the obvious use of this. But here was a slightly obscure use of it, which turned out to be very successful, is looking at solving hard unit commitment problems in where time is really important. So this was for the Chilean ISO, and they run a unit commitment and economic dispatch problem on a daily basis, looking a week ahead all the time. And they have to run this model, not just every day, but they may have to rerun it within the day as well. So they had a target of 1.5 hours to solve this problem, and a very, very tight gap, because they're just very concerned that they want, that gap's money, right? So they're very are very motivated to get the best solution possible. And even though it's the Chilean system you'd think might be quite small, when you're solving 168 time periods with that scale, it's complex, right? There's 12 classes of reserve. There's a full transmission network losses in there. There's nearly 800 generators and 28 storages, right? So it's a complicated model, even though it's a relatively small system. And the MIP is nearly 1 million non-zeros and 150,000 integers. It's 3.6 million non-zeros and 150,000 integers. So it's really big. And out of desperation, they went and bought all 3 solvers and threw this problem at it. And none of them could reach the gap reliably inside 1.5 hours. So
I think part of it was there's 300 generic constraints on there as well. And a whole array of custom decision variables modeling complex unit interactions, and it's a really difficult problem. It's badly scaled as well. They've got various high penalty prices applying to these constraints and things. So it was really like a worst case scenario. So we've tackled this by basically I was working on the mixed chronology when this problem came in, and I'm like, oh, well, I reckon we could actually apply this to replace ST, because MT running in fitted chronology is ST schedule. It's the same thing. It's the same code. It has the same formulation. So what we tried is, what came up with as one solution was to run full resolution for the first 2 days, so 24 blocks per day for the first 2 days, just full hourly. But then for the remaining 4 days, running the equivalent of 35 blocks a week. So as I said before, when PLEXOS runs here, it'll actually fit the daily blocks all the way through the horizon, then it fits the weekly, and it just takes those 2 days, and that takes those and puts that together. So it's really seamless and easy to use. You don't have to worry about the step from slicing daily to slicing weekly. It just does it. So this brought the MIP down. It's about coming down into that sort of solvable sweet spot region, right? So the problem came back to 2.2 million non-zeros, and the required MIP gap was coming up in about 30 minutes. And I think actually Felipe fiddled this and got it down to about 5 minutes in the end. But the thing is that the results were really good. The results were virtually indistinguishable from the full hourly result, because really they're only looking at those first 2 days anyway, right? So I think it's a really great innovation for short-term modelling as well, not just long-term. So thanks for listening to that, and I hope that was interesting. The mathematical solvers keep getting better. They can handle massive problems now. Can you imagine where we'll be in 5 years? I don't know. But we're trying to give you as much control over the simulation so you can make that trade-off, accuracy versus runtime, and we'll continue to do that. And I hope you pick up this feature and use it. I think it's got a lot of potential. And just a side note that internally, LT, MT, ST are pretty much identical, and in the future we're going to kind of merge those together and give you a way of just designing a custom simulation that's got long-term, medium-term, short-term, or whatever you want. Because essentially their features have merged. So that's all I had. Any questions?